I'm an atheist, and whatever that is, agnostic atheist, I'm not going to fine touch. I mean, I think that most science is atheistic, and there are a few scientists, less than 10%, who believe in God. But of the major scientists, more than 90% are atheists, and they transfer the aspects of science to their everyday life, which I think is an intellectual issue for me. It's not that I don't need some mystical thing, it's just that I don't accept it. And I think people who do accept it, they have a tremendous Achilles heel, in the sense that they accept anything, any old story from anywhere, 1,000 years old, which is no evidence. And these people bother me because they're in positions of power and responsibility. And when people are prepared to accept, you know, one of 20 or 30 different stories from thousands of years ago, I wonder what else they're prepared to accept when it comes to decisions which affect me.
I'm a cognitive psychologist who takes a thoroughly naturalistic approach to the human mind, namely the mind is a product of the brain is a product of evolution, that there is no need to invoke an immaterial soul in understanding how the mind works, and therefore one of the traditional motivations for believing in a spiritual realm or a deity seems to be in the process of being undercut by the sciences of human nature, such as neuroscience, evolution, and genetics.
And these all act on the serotonin 2A receptors. There's a specific receptor in the brain which all of these act on. And some of them are derivatives of adrenaline, like mescaline, and some are derivatives of serotonin, like LSD, dimethyltryptamine, and so on. But they all act at one particular place, the 2A receptors of serotonin. And some of these, the 2A receptors are stimulatory, and the 1A are inhibitory. So what these people are having is a gross overstimulation in the cortex of their 2A receptors, which induces these powerful visual experiences, powerful religious experiences. The 1A receptors, the inhibitory ones, there's one study done using imaging techniques, just recently published, of people who were two people, one group of people who were not psychologically interested in religion, the other ones who were. And they measured the activation of the 1A receptors on binding using methods of imaging methods. And they showed that the people who were religiously inclined had a decreased binding, very significant decreased binding to the 1A receptors. So the 1A receptors were not working. And they're the ones that inhibit the activated ones by the LSD. So the two lines of evidence, the 2A receptors are activated by drugs that produce religious experiences, and the people who have them normally have an underactive system which inhibits it.
I suppose I've been lazy. I haven't really pushed myself. And if I did, I might find myself becoming an atheist. One cannot deny that we seem to have a need to create something like a religion. And to deny that would be to deny history. I don't like feeling that I need to abandon a sort of rationalist approach to knowing what has gone on in the past and what may happen in the future. But I don't know.
I think a lot of theology is grappling with phantoms. So theologians have invented this almost self-consistent subject, which has no contact with physical reality at all. And they invent all sorts of questions which they then taunt humanity with. One of them is cosmic purpose. And they say there must be a purpose. You and your science can't explain it. And typical of theologians, they don't respect the power of the human intellect anyway. And they infer that no one will ever understand it. It is ineffable. God's purpose cannot be discerned. And of course those are fine words, but utterly meaningless. I mean, why should the thing have a purpose? They've invented this question in order to taunt us.
When I was younger, I used to sing in a church choir. I wasn't religious, I just liked the singing. And there was a lot of talk of souls and spirits and things. And by the time I was about 13, I realised the whole thing was really pretty illogical. I mean, I am just flesh and blood.
I don't know what your own religious faith is, or...
Well, I'm not a believer, but I love to sort
Are you
of...
an agnostic or an atheist, would you say?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think... Darwin, his response when he was asked whether he was an atheist was, well, I don't know, so I'm agnostic. I think actually I'm an atheist when all is said and done. I mean, if I'm really honest about it, because I really don't believe in a God.
The intellectual respectability of a claim that there are gods, say the gods of Olympus or the gods of Hinduism, or one god, say the god of Christianity, seems to me to be exactly on a par with the intellectual respectability of thinking that there are fairies in your garden. Belief in fairies was very, very widespread and very well attested right up into the late 19th century. Indeed, people believed that fairies were much more present in their lives than God was, because things that went missing, like your shoelaces or a teaspoon or something, had been nicked by them. So the comparison here is not a jokey one. And if you think that the reasons you have for thinking that there are fairies are very poor reasons, that it's irrational to think that there are such things, then belief in supernatural agencies in general is irrational in that way. So for me it's a question of the rationality of belief, and agnostics who think that there is as much chance that there might be such entities as that there might not be such entities fall foul of this stricture.
Are you agnostic? Are you an atheist? Do you have any? Do you want to have a faith in the unknown, or is science your God?
Yes, it is, in the sense that I'm comfortable with the unknown. That's the point of science. It's that there are places out there, obviously billions of places, that we know nothing about, and the fact that we know nothing about them excites me, and I want to go and find out about them, and that's what science is. So I think if you're not comfortable with the unknown, it's very difficult to be a scientist. So I don't need an answer. I don't need answers to everything. I want to have answers to find.
You don't study anthropology. You are an anthropologist. It's a way of life, and it's not just something to do from 9 to 5 as you do history or English literature or something like that. You are 24 hours an anthropologist. Well, I've never been quite that, because I'm still a bit of a historian, but I found it enormously important also religiously, because the moment I started reading it, and even before, I began to doubt my rather evangelical Christian upbringing, which I'd had. One of my uncles is quite an evangelical Christian, and so I'd been to boys' boarding camps with Christian, sort of fairly evangelical Christians. But I began to question this and wonder whether God really intended to cast 3/4 of humankind into outer darkness because they'd never heard of him. And none of the Christians I talked to could quite explain what his intention was in creating such a situation. So I lost my formal faith, but in anthropology I found an alternative framework which explains much of what goes on in the world without having to induce God.
It is my contention that a truly moral person who acts morally, not out of fear of damnation or out of promise of reward, but because it's the right thing, is, if anything, more moral. The atheist or the agnostic who throws himself in front of an oncoming bus to save a child, knowing that there is no eternal promise, that there is nothing but the grave that awaits him, is more moral than Sir Thomas More, who made a cost-benefit analysis as to whether or not to face eternal damnation by disobeying the Pope or face instantaneous death by disobeying the king. I think the problem of theodicy is a very serious one. How does one explain the disasters in the world? I remember when Elian Gonzalez was rescued, so many religious people said, see, God is wonderful. He saved Elian Gonzalez with porpoises. Yeah, but what about the ones who died? Was God not responsible for their death? Oh, God works in mysterious ways. If you are willing as human beings to abdicate your intelligence to a being who you don't understand or know, what will that lead you to? It will lead you to being Abraham. In the Bible, God comes down and says to Abraham, kill your son. Abraham says, sure. And he's prepared to kill his son. And there have been many Abrahams in the past.
I think that there are two kinds of atheists. There are those like Feuerbach or the Marxists who think that while they are materialists, what's interesting about religions in all forms is, perhaps especially for them, the Christian religion, that it embodied, but also interestingly deformed, various very deep human yearnings and aspirations, and that it's a very powerful route into trying to understand human psychology, to understand the religious urge. That's one kind of atheist who thinks, well, none of it's really true, but it is very, very important, it's very interesting, it's very deep. There's another kind of atheist, which is David Hume or Bertrand Russell, who thinks, well, I mostly can't understand what these people are claiming, but insofar as I understand what they're claiming, it's obviously false. And I'm that kind of atheist. It just doesn't interest me at all.